Hello. Hello,
Hi.
everyone. Hi, Poorvi. Nice to see you. I would like to introduce to everyone who is listening to this podcast my friend and a person who I really admire her work and her stance. I met her during an event in Amsterdam in December. It was about building bridges towards systemic change, and I really resonated with her message. So, voila, here we are today. We're recording this podcast. So, I would like to introduce you to Poorvi. She's a strategic social designer, researcher, and educator. She crafts tools, literally, frameworks, objects of art and design to generate positive impact on multi stakeholder ecosystems across eco socio political complexities. She has a deep commitment to creating social impact and change, and she works with industrial design, critical design thinking, and design research skills informed by the fields of anthropology, sociology, futurology, and decolonial studies. Wow, amazing. This I'm really dedicating this month on speaking with designers specifically that work on the intersection of design and systems change. So I'm very curious to have you here and to have this conversation. And how did you end up doing what you're doing? What's your story? Floor is
Thank you, Christiana. That's so sweet. I love the introduction as well. I think simply put, I started with design, and I was studying design in school, but we were educated to kind of do product design, right? So we kind of learned how to do 3D CAD and like design TVs or home objects, cabinets and stuff like that. But then at the same time, I was growing up in the time where climate change was a big topic. And we would always read in the news that, oh my God, okay, there's too much pollution, industries are polluting everything. So it's kind of weird to always go back to school and make more things, but also think about how these things are polluting the environment. So, really early on, I started reflecting on that, and I realized that there is probably some disconnect between what we're taught and what's happening in the real world. That's how I got introduced to sort of the social design way of thinking or the way of being. But then eventually that led to the systemic design education as well, where I got a bit less interested in objects, but how the objects are made or how they're used and where they come from. So that was my introduction to systemic design. And now it's been, I think, a long journey of experimenting with what works, what doesn't work, not only for the industry, but also for myself. Yeah.
Do you think that there are a lot of people like you out there? Is it like becoming a movement, or do you think you're the exception? Like how easy was it for you to find this path?
I have to say, I think there are a lot of people who are doing things like me. I don't think I'm an exception at all, but I do think systemically the industry or academia is not as ready for us as it could be. I know a lot of people within my own graduation batch, but also people outside who do things like me all the time, and that can be also approaching it through art, or even like music and things like that. So creatively, there's a lot of people who are doing this. Yeah.
I want to get back to something that you said during the conference that I remember, the unconference. It was like something along the lines that a lot of Gen Z people are going to start their own businesses just simply because the market is so difficult. How did you come up to this? How did you decide to start your own thing? Yeah, if you can share.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's being discussed a lot now within the Gen Z group of people that nobody's finding jobs. And especially when you graduate and you're starting to look for employment because you need to pay for rent and stuff like that, and you still don't find jobs. The only option that you kind of have is either to start your own business or start somewhere small, like freelancing or like working in a cafe. I have a lot of friends who work in a cafe as well. Um, I I started my business because I couldn't see myself fit anywhere. I couldn't see myself fit in the bubble of design, like the design world. I couldn't just imagine just designing products for a living. Neither could I imagine being sort of a researcher, just a researcher with no sort of impact and no physical outcome of the things that I research. So I realized that I couldn't really find my spot. So I just kind of started making my own. And I do think a lot of Gen Zs are doing this already. Yeah.
And can you tell us a bit more about what is your business? What is the business model? How does it work? Like, are you doing it alone with other people? Yeah.
Yeah. So I started the business last year, January, so it's not been that long. But I also have a co-founder and he's based in India. I'm also Indian, but now I live in the Netherlands. And I think we do a bunch of things. One is each of us have our own individual practice, and that really informs how the business is also built. And additionally, together, what we do is we do research projects. So we work a lot with the craft sector in India and we like engage them in our design process. As a matter of fact, I think they're equally as much as designers than as we are. And then we also do products, we develop products, and these products are also sold. So that is also another part of what we do. And we also sometimes have clients who reach out to us saying, hey, this is the interior space. We want to do it sustainably or we want to do it socially. We wanted to tell a story about how we collaborate with other people. So can you design the space? So we do these kind of things, but mainly our focus is research projects. So we apply for grants, different kinds of grants within the Netherlands, India, and internationally as well, to kind of finance topics that are not really explored so much in industry or academia as well as much as we can try to do it. Yeah.
So cool. So you're doing, on one hand, you're doing objects like physical things, designing things, but also working with the craft people from India in order to bring some innovation, I guess, if I understand correctly.
I
Super.
wouldn't I wouldn't call it innovation. I
Mm-hmm.
would just call it as we're sort of the bridge because the craft sector exists whether we exist or not. They still exist. They're still making their products, they're still making their craft. But then there is this entire aspect of the industry, and I mean you can say people who sort of run the design space, and we are the bridge between them. So I don't really see it as innovation, more as a sort of act of, yeah, bringing more unseen knowledge ahead. Yeah, if
And
that makes sense.
yeah, it does. And I also actually, speaking about innovation, I don't really like when people say, oh, this is social innovation, because sometimes it's like, mm, I think I told you about this story. Once I heard there are two types of people who learn how to swim. One type of people is the one that they don't have a choice, so they learn how to swim because they don't have a choice but learning how to swim, otherwise you drown. And the second type of people that learn how to swim in order to show off their skills in their backyard, in their big pool. So speaking about innovation, sometimes people are innovating because that's the only way to survive, and other times you're innovating simply a little bit because of you're privileged enough not to have the time to consider something new. How do
Yeah.
you, in this spectrum, I don't know if it resonates first of you, the story, in the spectrum, if it does, where do you find yourself in your business?
Yeah, no, that's a really good metaphor, actually. I think it's very applicable also to the Gen Z and the unemployment sort of crisis that's going on. I would say that I was brought up privileged. I am privileged, and the only reason that I'm able to do all of this is because I have this privilege. The business itself, I wouldn't know where to place it, but it's really sort of, it jumps in between both spaces. But I don't think that this business would have started if I didn't have this ability to educate myself, be in another country, have access or even understanding of how these funding systems or institutional systems work. So, in that sense, I am really the person who was taught to swim because I have a pool in my backyard. But then I also started realizing, wait, there are people who are learning because they have to learn how to swim. And I started moving towards them and seeing how I can bridge that. Yeah.
Yeah, I can, from our initial conversation, and I can really see that you're aiming to be that bridge in the world, which I think is, I think speaking from someone who I also consider myself, even though I'm coming from Bulgaria, which is not the most privileged country, I still am privileged, and I'm trying to use all my skill set and power to bridge that gap. In talking about all of this, and because I often talk about the poly crisis and how things are interconnected, how do you think your business or your aspirations in life, how are they connected to the poly crisis? What is the issue you're trying to entangle, if any?
Mm. A lot of what I do, like in my own practice and also with the business, is decolonial in its nature. And that's sort of the starting point for most of the inquiries that I have. But I do believe that every single thing that I do is related to some crisis or the other. And I have come to believe that all crises are related at this point, and it sort of stems from maybe one individual crisis somewhere, but it kind of, yeah, keeps developing and interconnecting and intersecting. The reason I approach it from the decolonial sort of perspective is that my education has led me to realize that colonialism was sort of the root of what destructed the Indian craft sector, and also destructed the Indian economic stability. And there's so many things within India that kind of start, connecting to this act of colonization of the country. So that realization sort of made me think of, wait, every single thing that I do or research that I'm doing is decolonial. So I didn't approach it with the intention of being decolonial. It just sort of came to me through my process. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think I often wonder what is first. Is it this? Where is this extractivist mentality coming from? Like I don't understand because I'm sure, at least again speaking from Bulgaria, I'm not. We were never a colonial power, but once I started digging, I realized we have colonial practices within our society. We're saying, oh, these type of people, they should do all the black work, and it's like, it's like this. So I wonder, where do you think this is coming from? Would you say that the colonialism was a starting point, or do you think there's something from the back?
I would say the intersection of colonialism and the rise of capitalism as ideologies and how they married each other, because they don't exist in isolation. To be colonial, you have to have an economic model that works for you to keep extracting resources from another country. So I do feel like it's this combination of both of them that is really the root of the problem. And that's also what we're experiencing now. We still live in a post colonial society. We still live in a sort of I wouldn't say the declining age of capitalism, but the time where we're starting to realize the loopholes in the systemic design of capitalism itself. So I do feel like this marriage between colonialism, capitalism, and its sort of little babies out in the world creating other crises is really the root of the problem. Yeah.
And given that this is happening and this is the context, what do you need to keep on doing the work that you're doing? What resources do you think you need?
I would be bold enough to say that at this point, I'm unemployed anyways, because I'm not even looking for employment now. But then I think I'm also feeling like things are slowly starting to unravel themselves, and there's a sort of destruction or like deconstruction of things. So I would be bold enough to say that actually we would need a more rapid format of deconstruction of what is already there. So more breakage of systems, or more, I wouldn't say crises, but more revealing moments of crises that allows new sort of ways of approaching things. Because if we keep operating from the same model that we have been before, we're going to reconstruct the same issues that we have been sort of struggling with. So to stop doing that, we need to first start from, I think, almost level zero. And that is very difficult to imagine. So at least cognitively, we should be enabled to start at level zero. That requires education, unlearning, that requires a lot of efforts, I think, in many ways. Yeah.
Yeah, I hear you, and I think it's very visible this deconstruction that's going on in the world right now. And I'm afraid that probably a lot of people will suffer under this inevitably. And probably it's going to be again vulnerable people, the most vulnerable people that are going to pay the price. Yeah, which is quite sad. But okay, we're in it, and as you said, like we might as well just go faster into it and then see what can be born out of this. And speaking about our society in general, and imagine we're on this ground zero. What do you think? What do you think would help us to going through this transition from where you stand? Like, what do you see as practices that can help us because we're going through a tough bridge, right?
Yeah, I think as a social designer, my brain always jumps into the social first. And I always feel like the reconstruction of how we relate to each other on different levels is what we need more than ever. And that doesn't even mean like how maybe international politics, how countries relate to each other, but also at the small scale, like how do neighbors interact with each other? How do we care for each other? How do we sort of live in a particular area and share resources or things or cars or whatever it may be? So I feel what we need is really a strong sort of social connection or web of connections. I remember that something was said at the conference. I think it was by Charles, who said that in a crisis, when there's a flood, when there is an extremely crazy, harmful, violent crisis, all that remains is sort of the social connect that you have, or who is beside you, who's your family members, who's around you, and that I think stuck with me because that's what remains. And when we think of how do I start rebuilding anything, the first thing that we do is like look to who's beside us and say, hey, can you help me out? And let's try and do this together. Yeah.
I love that. I don't know if you know this movement, art of hosting conversations, art of hosting and harvesting conversations that matter. By the way, they're
Mm,
going to have a training in India at the end of the month, so I might as well add it because I think this type of work about reconnecting the social fabric, what you're describing, is really embedded into this method. And actually, I'm hosting one art of hosting training in Bulgaria, and the question we chose is how can we be better neighbors? Because
mm,
in essence, this being a neighbor, there's so much about being a, a member of a community or of a city. Like how can I be a better neighbor breaks it down really to the social fabric of it. So
yeah. And it's difficult being a good neighbor. I don't do it well myself either. I mean, I live in an apartment building. Most of the times it's just a small conversation and then we move on. But yeah.
yeah, and even what does it mean, like in today's urban environment, to be a good neighbor? Is it like knowing your neighbors? What is it about? So I think sitting down, leaning in, and relaxing into this question and reflecting on it, I think it's a super important exercise.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I'll put it in the show notes. Maybe you can share it with other people in India. Um,
Yeah.
and going slowly towards more like wishful thinking, let's say, but I like
Hmm.
to do this because I believe that yeah, when you're manifesting, when you're asking for something, then maybe you will receive it. What do you think? We already spoke about this social fabric. What do you think there is needed more of in the world right now? And given everything that's happening, what is it, if you could choose one thing that you can have more of in the world for yourself and for humanity, what would that be?
Mm. I would say slowness and care. I think the desire to rush into anything really pushes us to do things that we don't fully maybe think about or even feel for. So, having to do things slowly, and that would mean everything from educating ourselves to working in the industry to making things or collaborating with people or making friends. Doing it slowly and not being rushed would be really a wishful thing that I would want for myself at this point because I'm always rushed. I'm like, next grant application, next exhibition, let's do this, let's do that. But yeah, slowness and then care because I feel that when we start, even with caring for our neighbors, for example, but also when we start living through care itself, we not only care for people around us, but the things around us and the spaces around us. Then it slowly sort of develops into a larger sort of way of living which I think we really need because the rush and the lack of care together is quite harmful, I would say, not only on a daily basis, but overall as well.
Oh, I really like that. And it reminds me, I have this story, another thing that I remember from the conference that I heard, or maybe somewhere in a book I read. It's like when change is happening, it starts first, like imagine it, I think it's a flooding, it's the metaphor of the flooding. And first it's on your ankles, and you can't really start swimming only when it gets up to your hips you can start swimming. So with
Mm,
regards of this systemic change is like, okay, we need to be ready for it, for because when the water starts to come to our hips, then we can kind of already start swimming. But it's really this maybe care and slowness that allows for, it's counterintuitive because as things seem to be rising and to be more worrisome, it actually, the invitation or the request is, can you slow down into this and yeah, prepare for when the water is ready.
Yeah, I fully agree. And it also applies like for me on a daily basis when I'm more stressed and when I feel like I really need to perform right now and there's like deadlines and stuff like that. It's really rest that keeps me going and it's just slowness and a bit of like attention to something that's a bit more around me rather than larger concepts.
Yeah, because I think there's generally, we've put so much emphasis, the pendulum went so much, the societal pendulum, into doing, having, like all this active energy, and we've completely undervalue, or how do I say this, like we're not paying attention to rest, to regeneration and restoration and all these. So,
Mm,
so maybe perhaps actually this is the, by being in that space, we will be able to swim through the
yeah.
transition that's coming.
Yeah, I really hope so.
Yeah.
And swimming, not like flailing around, but actually swimming.
And we,
Mm.
it's interesting. Swimming is a consistent metaphor in our conversation. That's
Maybe it's the
interesting.
oncoming summer. We're like
Yeah,
ready to jump in the water.
we're already yearning for it.
Yeah.
Okay, and is there something that you would like to address, like to use this as a platform to share something of what's coming up for you, or anything else that you would like to use this for?
I am always an advocate for reflection, and everywhere I go, I try to ask questions with the single outcome of wanting people to reflect on their positionality, on what they do, what kind of power they hold, or what their goals are. A lot of my projects also kind of do that. A lot of my research projects in my own work, not in my company's work. So I would also like to sort of see how this sort of platform or this podcast can be used to create reflection or moments of reflection for people who are listening or watching. And how that would be enabled then would be an interesting conversation. But any sort of reflection into who you are, what's your positionality, what work do you do, what power do you hold, and what are your dreams? These are like the five main questions that I would kind of just leave leave the podcast with.
I love it. I hope people. I'm gonna make sure that I put them somewhere visibly, and I hope that people will use the time and slow down and really take the time to reflect on these questions. That will be really lovely in this spring-ish time for the northern
Yeah,
hemisphere people, to use it as a reflection of what seeds do you want to plant and who do you want to be in
yeah,
the world.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation. It was really lovely. I'm really happy to have met you, and I wish you all the best with your work and everything that you're doing in the world. Just with your being, you don't have to be doing. And yeah, let's be in touch, and I'll make sure to share your work after also on the show notes.
Thank you, Christiana, so much.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, bye.